What's up guys, Belamy Prime here, and in today's video we're going to be talking about a very highly requested topic from you guys that I've been meaning to cover for a while now, and that is weapon swaps and on-use effects in ArcheAge. Ones that are going to very highly boost your DPS and things like that in combat, or just ones that have really nice auxiliary effects that really augment your PvP capabilities. So if you aren't already aware, what I mean when I say a weapon swap or an on-use effect is basically a specific piece of equipment. More often than not, this will be a weapon that we can switch in on the fly with a keybind or whatever it is you want to use, pop it for the effect or buff that it gives, and then switch it back out and still maintain that buff, which will really highly augment our character in different situations. We're going to be focusing on specifically weapon swaps and on-use effects that are going to be quite easy to acquire early on in ArcheAge Unchained, ones that won't be too difficult for the average player to acquire. But for the sake of fun, we're going to talk about some more high-end weapon swaps at the end of the video, which are going to be quite difficult to acquire because they come from world boss drops and things like that, but are very powerful and very fun to use if you can get your hands on them. So we're going to jump right in and start talking about these weapon swaps and on-use effects. Now the first weapon swap that we're going to be talking about today is a melee specific weapon swap, which is very powerful in a lot of different situations. Actually, to be honest, in pretty much all situations, if you're popping this, it's going to be good for you. Now this is the Darkwatcher Dagger. Now this drops in the Serpentis dungeon in the second to last room. After you kill the boss, a chest will appear. You open the chest, your group can loot the chest. It will drop a number of different pieces of armor and weapons. If you win the roll, or if this drops, you can get your hands on a Darkwatcher Dagger. Now this on-use effect gradually increases your melee critical rate up to 20% over a 20-second duration. Now, the way we use this, and this will be the case for all the weapons that we talk about today, is we like to throw it on a keybind, whatever's comfortable for you. We can see here in our character, we have our main hand weapon here. If we press the key once, it will switch in the dagger. If we press it again, it will use the dagger. And that's how that functions. We can then switch it back out for our main hand, and we maintain the buff that, like it says, gradually increases melee critical damage up to 20% over 20 seconds. So we keep that buff. We can pop this running into combat or during combat if you find an opening, and this is just going to augment your critical rate, which is never a bad thing, right? Okay, so now that the Serp Dagger is back on cooldown, we can show you guys exactly what that effect does. Now if we open up our character sheet here, we can see our melee critical rate is at 85.4%. The initial pop of the Darkwatcher Dagger itself will give us straight away 10% critical rate, so it'll jump up to about 95%, and then it will increase by a further 10% over the duration of 20 seconds. So we'll go ahead and pop that here, and we'll show our melee critical rate. So we'll pop that. I'll put this up on screen for you guys to see the melee critical rate, but you'll see it starts at an additional 10%. It'll then increase over the duration before it falls off. So basically you'll have 20 seconds of increased critical rate by a minimum of 10%, which will then slowly increase over the duration and then fall off at the end. So this is very strong for any kind of melee who doesn't already have a capped critical rate. So very strong. The next weapon swap that we're going to talk about today is another dungeon drop, which is also melee oriented but not specifically used for just melees. It's also very strong for archers and mages, but this is the Doom Shadow no Dachi. Now this drops from the Missong dungeon on easy mode. It is a no Dachi, so a two-hand melee weapon, whose on-use effect reads increases melee attack by 5% and attack speed by 111 for 12 seconds and decreases your physical defense by 5% for the duration. So obviously this gives melee attack and attack speed, which is really good for melees, but the attack speed is also very useful for archers and mages as it decreases your global cooldowns, meaning you can fire arrows or, use spells as a mage much faster. Now, before I explain more in depth, I will point out that there is a tier 2 version of this no Dachi, which I will put on screen right now. This version of the no Dachi gives 10% increased melee attack and 250 attack speed for an 18-second duration, but decreases your physical defense by 8%. So it's got a slightly bigger drawback, but obviously it's much better. It has more than double melee attack and almost double attack speed, and a much longer duration, so this is very good. Now I'll quickly explain why this is not just good for melees and why it's good for archers and mages. is because, like I mentioned earlier, the global cooldown. So the faster your attack speed is, the better your global cooldowns are, meaning as an archer you can fire your arrows much faster because of the, a less global cooldown. And as a mage, this is especially powerful for mages who are playing Spellsinger and using the backdrop lightning fireball combo, because you can fire off a lot more lightning fireballs, therefore increasing your burst and DPS by a lot. And as well as Malediction mages who are using the Crushing Waves combo, this is very, very powerful because you're able to throw your Crushing Waves much, much faster, therefore dealing a lot more AoE DPS. So an extremely good weapon swap, not only for melees, but any DPS class where global cooldown is something that is going to affect your DPS output. The next weapon swap we'll talk about today is easily the most powerful weapon swap on usability in the game for any kind of DPS, and that is the Honors Frenzied no Dachi. Now, there are two versions of this. The tier 1 version, which you purchase from a weapon vendor, which you can find in any town or city basically, for the most part in the game. You buy it for about 100 gold and then you just have it. I'll put that version up on screen. It's the exact same, except the Berserk buff only lasts for 10 seconds. You can upgrade this at any anvil with just some Blood Archeum crystals to the tier 2 version, which is the mighty version that I have right here. It just increases the buff duration by an extra 2 seconds. You use Blood Archeum crystals. You can acquire them through the Prestige store, which is the guild store that you have if you're in a guild. So quite easy to upgrade, but it's absolutely not necessary to get the tier 2 version. The first one is fine. On my mage account, I pretty much never upgraded to the tier 2 version because it's only an extra 2 seconds and it's not super important to get that extra duration, but it is nice. So the weapon, when used, gives you a buff called Berserk. It reads, enrages the target to make them berserk for 12 seconds. The Berserk buff gives you an increased attack speed by 333, skill damage by plus 25%, and reduces your cast time by 8%. However, it also increases the received damage you take by 70%. So essentially, it gives you a shit ton of damage, but also makes you into a glass cannon that's going to die very quickly if you take too much damage. So it is a very risky weapon swap to be using because it will make you basically one-shottable by almost anyone, but it will increase your damage by a very, very large amount. So I highly recommend picking it up and trying it. It's very, very fun to use and very, very strong if you find safe situations where you can pop it and dish out a ton of damage. The next weapon swap we're going to talk about today is the Monstrous Desire, which drops in the Greater Howling Abyss dungeon. This is less of a PvP weapon swap and more of one that's just kind of useful while you're farming like mobs and things like that for maybe your Hiram or whatever it is you might be farming. It basically just gives you a little bit of extra mana regen, which helps maintain your mana as you farm through mobs. I personally like to use it hand in hand with Meditate because they have the exact same cooldown, so I'll pop my Monstrous Desire, then pop my Meditate and let this run for the 30 second duration. Just helps augment my mana regen just a little bit, so I don't have to really use like consumables and things like that to maintain my mana while I'm farming. Just a way to save a little bit of gold. It would be very useful early on in Unchained to have one of these just because of, you won't have to make your own food or buy them from vendors or whatever it is while you're farming your huge amount of Hiram and stuff like that. So this drops from the Greater Howling Abyss dungeon from any of the bosses. It used to only drop from the third boss, but I've had it personally drop for myself on the final boss, and I've heard that it can drop from any of the bosses through the GHA dungeon. So if you go through there for whatever reason, maybe you're trying to get your quest drop for your Unistia Guardian Ring, and you see a Monstrous Desire drop, it's a scepter, it will always drop at Arcane, and if you see that, you may as well pick it up. It will be useful for you if you keep your hands on it. You just chuck it on your bar and tap it every now and again to get a little bit of extra mana and regen while you're farming, to save yourself on a little bit of gold on soups and things like that. So although it's not the greatest weapon swap in the world, it is worth mentioning because it will help you save a little bit of currency early on. The next weapon swap we'll talk about today is more of a healer specific weapon swap, but you can use it as pretty much any class if you would like to find a way to comfortably use it. But it's a shield that gives a heal over time to all allies within, or up to 10 allies within a 10 meter range. So this is a Stealth Fang shield which drops in the Missong dungeon. Not only is it a good weapon swap, but it's actually a really good main hand shield that you can use as a healer if you're in cloth.
It gives stamina and spirit, so it's very much geared towards a healer, and you can synthesize this all the way up to the Eternal grade, at which point it actually gives a very large amount of physical defense. You can get an upgraded version of this, which I won't go into specifics on how to actually get this, but the on-use effect restores an X amount of health to up to a max of 10 allies within 10 meters over 5 seconds. So I've gone ahead and taken a little bit of damage here, and we're going to pop this. So I've dragged it down onto my bar. I'm just going to click this here, and we'll switch to it, and then we pop it, and we can see it heals a little bit of health over the duration, which is 5 seconds. Now, I do believe this scales if you have like better healing power, and obviously the higher tier the shield itself is, the more this fight heal actually results in being. If you end up with the tier 2 version of the shield at Eternal, the heal itself will be a lot better than what I just displayed here. So if you're a healer and you're not sure what kind of shield to get, this is a good shield that you can get early on, which will take you all the way into late game. So I suggest keeping your eye on it. Now I've switched over to my other character here to show you guys the next weapon swap on-use ability that we'll talk about today, which is the Disciple's Shield. Now this shield has a chance to drop from the final boss in the Abyssal Library dungeon. Its on-use effect reads, deals 44 magic damage to enemies within 12 meters, pulling in other enemies within a 15 meter radius, and it gives an immunity so they can't be pulled more than once within a 15-second window. But if you're familiar with the Vicious Implosion skill from Oromancy, it functions very similarly to this. You pop it, and after a small delay, it will pull in all enemies within a 15 meter radius. Obviously it deals a little bit of damage like it says, but that's negligible. You don't really want to worry about that. We're mostly here for the pull effect. This synergizes really well with any kind of AoE CC that you can apply. So this is very powerful on CC mages and CC tanks and things like that. But also as a Dark Runner, you can do an AoE trip combo with this, which is why I like to have it. But we'll show it here. We can cast it on an enemy or an ally to, to begin the pull at their location, but we like to self-cast this just to pull targets to ourselves. So if we're in a group situation in PvP, we can self-cast the shield like so. It will pull in all enemies within a certain radius of 15 meters, and they'll be pulled to your location. You can then follow it up with any kind of AoE trip or AoE CC, whether it's a Hell Spear or a Fear or a Bubble or whatever it is you have. This is very, very useful and very, very powerful in a lot of PvP and PvE situations. So if you're running the Abyssal Library and your group is able to take down the final boss, keep an eye out for this shield. It's very, very useful, especially for some specific classes such as CC mages and tanks and things like that. So a very powerful weapon. Now, a really fun thing that you can do with this shield pull that I am probably going to regret showing all of you guys is you can create a portal and then use the shield pull to pull enemy players into the portal to teleport them to different locations. So if we create a portal like this and then pop the shield and then jump right as the shield pull goes through, it will pull them through the portal. And you can use this to portal people from, different zones to maybe zones where they're going to die to an NPC, or, it's just a fun way to troll people. Maybe you port them to a house that has a closed door, so they have no way of getting out unless they recall or something like that. Like I said, I'm probably going to regret showing you guys this, but just in case you're worried about something doing this to you, there is an outplay. You can go into your settings and go down to functionality and disable travel through other players' portals. This will stop people from doing this to you while you're AFK. But most people won't do this, so more often than not you can troll people pretty easily by teleporting them through portals like that. The next weapon swap we're going to talk about is the Blooddrinker Blossom. This is a shield that drops from the Serpentis dungeon. It's on the same loot table as the Darkwatcher Dagger that we spoke about at the start of the video. So much like the dagger, if you get to the second to last room in the Serpentis dungeon, kill the boss there, a chest will spawn. This shield has a chance to be in that chest. If you win the roll with against your group, you can get your hands on this shield. It has an on-use effect that decreases received damage by 21% for 9 seconds. This will make you significantly tankier and is very useful in a lot of different scenarios, especially for players who aren't using a Darkwatcher Dagger, because it shares a cooldown with that. So I highly suggest any class that isn't a melee to go for this shield. It's very useful whether you're doing gladiator arenas, duels, or, you know, jumping into an enemy group in PvP in the open world or anything like that. Any situation where you may want to switch to a shield, you know, maybe you're a staff using mage, it's very easy to swap to a shield if you're taking a bit of damage and you're on a downtime, you're not actually attacking. You switch your staff to the shield, use the effect, and then when you're ready to attack again, switch back to your staff, and you're going to take a lot of less damage when you're using this. So a very useful on-use effect. I highly suggest you go after this, especially if you're already doing this Apprentice Dungeon for other reasons. It's a great weapon swap. Now, I did plan on finishing up this video by talking about some of the high-end weapon swap items that are in the game, which are much more difficult to acquire because they come from boss drops and things like that, and most players won't even get the chance to use them. These items are things like the Kraken Scepter, the Kraken Shield, Kraken Long Spear, different things from the Red Dragon and things like that. Unfortunately, they are great, and we're not going to talk about them today, but if you guys are interested in that kind of video, I would be more than happy to make a small video covering each of those kind of weapons and what they do, just in case you come up against people who have them per se. But I don't know, if you guys are interested in that, let me know down in the comments. But that's going to be it for this video, guys. For the most part, I covered pretty much all of the mandatory or the strongest weapon swaps that are going to be easy for you to access as a player on ArcheAge Unchained. The best one that I covered on the list, being the Honor no Dachi, is the easiest one to acquire. It's just straight up 100 gold or so from a vendor. It's the best weapon swap you can hope for, especially as a DPS. But as always, guys, I really hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learnt a little bit about ArcheAge, and I'd like to give a huge shout out to my patrons, Adam B, Tyler, and Navro. Very much appreciate your support, guys. Like, comment, and subscribe. And if you haven't already, join my Discord. We got a nice community going over there with a lot of chatter. Everyone's very hyped for ArcheAge Unchained. So come on over, say hello, and I'll see you guys in the next video of whatever I make. Cheers.